Good day, everyone. Don't worry if you missed some of the top stories this week. We put up a special collection just for you. Therapists. What's something people are afraid to tell you because they think it's weird, but that you've actually heard a lot of times before? Story 1. Unwanted intrusive thoughts are normal and do not mean you're a bad person. Yes, even intrusions of spicy or religious or moral themes. By definition, these are thoughts that are unwanted because they go against your own values and highlight what you don't want to do. E.g., a religious person having unwanted blasphemous images pop into their mind, or a new parent having unwanted spicy thoughts about their new baby. However, normal these thoughts are, over 90% of the population. The moral nature of these thoughts mean that often people experience a lot of shame and take many years before they first tell someone about them. Edit. Because this is getting more visibility than I realized, the occurrence of these thoughts and images and urges are normal. The best way to manage them is to accept that they're normal, albeit unpleasant brain processes, and a sign of the opposite of who you are, and are therefore unlikely to ever do. Let the thought run its course in the background while you bring your attention back to insert something you can see, feel, hear, taste, or touch. I usually say something like, "Okay, mind. Thanks for that, mind. I'm going to go back to washing the dishes and the sound and sensation of the water while you ponder all the nasties. Carry on." I literally say it to myself with a slightly amused tone because I'm always genuinely amused at all the wild stuff my brain can produce. With my last baby, I would suddenly think to myself, what if I just drop her on the floor? Was horrified for a bit before I realized it was normal. So every time I would think about something like that, I would complete the thought. What if I dropped the baby? Baby could expire. I would go to jail. That would really suck. Let's not drop the baby. Edit to add, I don't think this comment would be seen by many. It was a quickly written response. In order of importance, the first thing that would be horribly wrong with dropping my child is that she could expire. That would be the worst. But then there's also the possibility of jail, which is why it was second. So for everyone thinking my biggest concern is jail, it's not. Someone I know had some of these thoughts and it freaked her out. She told someone at a postpartum group, and the woman leading her took her over to the hospital and had her admitted for psychiatric watch. She didn't say, nor did she have any desire to do those actions. She just visualized it, and it frightened her, and neither the postpartum group nor the hospital knew how to deal with it. They kept her for 3 days before transferring her to a facility where it took another 2 days to finally see someone who was qualified to talk about mental health, and they were somewhat appalled by the whole scenario. They just told her that she needed to get some uninterrupted sleep and maybe to see a therapist to help her talk through things. It was incredibly hard and frustrating. It took quite a few more years to actually get over the trauma of being admitted when trying to seek help, and I'm not sure she's really gotten over it. Edit. Because some people are saying it's laughably false, I should clarify. She went to the postpartum group because she was looking for help. When the person leading it said she needed more serious help, she believed them, and when they admitted her, she did so willingly, thinking that she was a danger to her child. That is why I commented originally, because people around her thought that intrusive thoughts were bad and validated her own fears. It's really common for people with OCD to experience postpartum in form of continual intrusive thoughts of harm to the baby. I'm so glad somebody told me this. I knew that if I had no desire to do these things, I was not in danger to the baby. I told no one. I must have visualized that baby expiring 30,000 times of different causes in 4 months. It was so depressing. Baby is 6 years old now. Very bright and talented and attractive and funny, and didn't choke or fall or get crushed or dropped or smothered or burned or drowned or mutilated. I'm so glad I wasn't misperceiving that as how I wanted to unalive my baby. I would have jumped off a bridge. Tell a friend. The difference is, Do you find this thought attractive or sad? If sad, congrats. You're just going to suffer for a while. But you don't need to hand your child to CPS. Intrusive thoughts are kind of interesting as an idea, and I think one of the things I was taught growing up, is the idea of when someone says, don't think of a pink elephant. What's the first thing you think of? A pink elephant. But then you train yourself to think of something else, like a right after it. Okay, and a pink elephant comes into your mind, you're trained to think of a blue pig. Every time you think of a pink elephant, think of a blue pig. So you kind of get distracted. Kind of like what they were talking about when you try to focus back on something that you can see or feel that you're doing. Story 2. Another great example for this from my experience is that I'm a late 20s male teacher and spent a couple of years substituting at the high school level until settling down in a middle school. In the beginning, it was absolutely horrifying to me that there were some students who were undeniably very attractive. I thought I was a monster and hadn't realized it until now, but my therapist just asked, well, if you had the chance to have intimacy with any of them, knowing it was consensual and you never get caught, would you do it? Then before I could answer, he said, don't even worry about answering that out loud. Just ask yourself. If the answer is yes, we should talk about this topic more. If the answer is no, then you're absolutely 100% normal. Basically, he explained to me that it was a textbook intrusive thought because I could become intimately aroused by the appearance, but at the same time absolutely disgusted when even imagining actually engaging. He said it's important to be honest with myself and make sure my answer would be the same if it were a 0% chance I'd ever get caught and the other party was consensually enjoying, i.e., not physical violation. Still, to this day, that helped me a lot because I have not even a sliver of doubt that I would never in a million years follow through with that arousal. But a junior or senior in yoga pants and a crop top can still potentially lead to natural arousal. Thank you for writing this. I've struggled a lot with similar thoughts that I felt too much shame to even think about, and it made me feel better when I realized that my answer to the equivalent question also would be no. Thank you so much for saying this. I struggled with this. Specifically, I had massive anxiety around gore and violence when I was 14, and seeing any, whether it was real or fake, or even implied, like an off-screen unaliving in a movie, my brain would come up with the most awful and horrendous and vile images of things, including people I knew. The whole spectrum of my problem is deeper than what I'll go into and more complicated than what I'll say. I genuinely thought I was going fracking crazy. Thought I was going to end up on horrible meds or locked up for thinking like this, even though I didn't want to think like this. I hated these thoughts. I couldn't look at normal everyday objects without somehow linking them to awful, murderous, or graphic scenes. I eventually got CBT therapy for this, as it was completely ruining my life, but one of the absolute biggest bits of relief I have ever had was being told that intrusive thoughts were extremely common, and that I wasn't a lunatic in the making. It was extremely difficult to admit some of the more graphic and upsetting things I was thinking, but deity damn, once I did, and it wasn't met with disgust, and I was told that lots of people get these thoughts, I was so happy. Again, reading your comment has reminded me of how common it really is, and reaffirmed me that I wasn't and am still not that weird for it. Thank you. I think in this one, if you're doing a lot of these very intrusive, violent thoughts, you think that some people that deal with it just end up making movies about them? I think that's where a lot of these... I mean, what? Didn't the new Saw movie just come out? I think there's quite a lot of intrusive thoughts that people end up making money off of, and they don't end up harming anybody. So there's that to think about. Children of, I want to talk to your manager, parents. What has been your most embarrassing experience? Story 1. Scene. Any fast food drive-thru. Worker. Ma'am, can you please drive forward a little bit while your food finishes up? Mom. No. Folds arms. When I was a manager at McDonald's, I had a guy do this. We had a freak rush on chicken nuggets, like 5 20-pieces in a row. The customer pulls to the window. The cashier let him know it was going to be another 3 minutes for his nuggets, and did he want to wait or get something else? He demands to speak with the manager. He says that he has been waiting 5 minutes already and he isn't going to pay or move until his food is ready. I said that I needed him to pay and pull forward in order to clear the drive-thru. He refused and said they'll have to wait. I went to the back window, put a drawer in, and we started cashing and giving the food out there. 20 minutes later, a fuming customer at the front window begins pounding on the window. I open it, and he screams at me to know where his food was. I told him he wasn't getting any food. He was blocking my drive-thru and impeding my business, and he needed to leave or I would be calling the police. It looked like he would explode with anger, but he just screeched out of there. It was the most satisfying interaction with an entitled customer I had while working at McDonald's. Years later, I do slightly regret this. I worry I needlessly angered someone to the point where he could have taken it out on someone else, i.e., kids or wife. We had someone try to order 100 double cheeseburgers through the drive-thru when I worked at a fast food place. They were angry when they were asked to pull around to the front, park, and come inside. They seriously thought we'd either have 100 double cheeseburgers laying around just for them, or that we'd be able to make them in under 3 minutes. This was in a town of less than 5,000 people. I hated giant orders without any notice. Orders like that were definitely annoying, but they were made worse if the person couldn't fathom why their order might take more than 90 seconds and started complaining. The worst was when Little League teams would come in 5 minutes before we closed without calling ahead, or when the owner would see a bus drive up 15 minutes after we closed and all cleaned up and unlocked the door to let them in. I always wondered what would happen if we just flat refused to turn everything back on. I mean, going into a rage after 5 minutes? It's like people who get impatient with microwaves warming up their food. A lot of businesses, especially a lot of fast food businesses, have built their reputations on preparing food fast. But there are limits. There's got to be limits. People just don't understand how this stuff is made, or either they've forgotten that they used to work in a fast food place too, and just how fast it takes to prepare this food. Story 2. One time my granddad got a sausage roll at a football match during halftime. When he got back to his seat, he found it was overdone. The pastry was quite burned. The man was irate. He didn't take it back straight away as the second half was about to start, but he spent much of the second half angrily lamenting his savory snack letdown. So he takes it home, calls the customer service number on the back. I assume he had a few choice words for the poor soul on the other end, but I wasn't present for this, and keeps the remainder of the sausage roll in the freezer for the next couple of weeks. Skip ahead to the next match day. My granddad tells me we're heading out early so he can have his sausage roll replaced. The customer service line told him to go to kiosk 3 at the front of the ground next to the ticket office. When we arrive, however, the shutters are down at the food place. The old man looks around growling and turning red in the face, stamps right over to window number 3 of the ticket office, and slams his frozen burned sausage roll down like a fracking flaky gauntlet. At this point, I'm trying to convince him the ticket office was a completely different department to the catering concession, but my granddad was having none of it. The lady working the ticket window continually attempted in vain to convince him the same. They sell match tickets, not hot snacks, but this just got him angrier and angrier. Across comes a colleague behind the glass. Now there's just 2 people to rage at. Then a head steward comes to attempt to defuse the situation, and my granddad begins to wave the burnt sausage roll in this man's face. I was actually surprised he didn't whack him with it. At this point, I'm mortified by the whole affair, wishing I'd have stayed back at the house until nearer kickoff. Eventually, after an hour or so, the shutters come up on the food concession. Fella at the counter goes, "You must be Mr. Allerginge," and calmly resolves the situation, dispatching a freshly baked sausage roll with the steady hands of a surgeon. My granddad is completely satisfied with the results of his hour of insolent rage, and as we're walking away, he turns to me and says, "That's how you get things sorted." Every time after they get what they want, they just look at you smugly and say, "And that's how it's done." Like they're so proud and just taught you some amazing life skill. Couldn't this all have been avoided if this person just looked at the sausage roll to begin with and make sure it was okay? Yeah, I understand. There are to be expectations that people behind the counter are going to prepare your food to a certain degree of competency. But still, check it out for yourself. And maybe if you're that upset about it, maybe take a little time during the match to go back to the window during the game. Maybe. Story 3. I worked at Best Buy. I stopped in with my mom one day because she wanted to buy me the Star Wars DVD box set for my birthday. Cool. I had a huge crush on the girl that was working the customer service counter. Well, the DVD set rang up $10 more than it was priced, and my mom deliberately didn't say anything until after the transaction so she could claim the effing $5 Michigan scan law bounty. My crush didn't know how to process it, and the manager was busy, so my mom tore into her about how it was her job and how she should understand how to do things. At my job. To a girl I liked. My life was miserable for a while afterward. Edit. R.I.P. my inbox. No, I never got the courage up to ask her out, and she left the store afterwards. Michigan scanner law. Price must be clearly displayed when the item is located on the shelf or on the item itself. If the item is rung up and the machine prices it at higher than the signage and the customer has 1. Paid that price, and 2. Has a receipt, then within 30 days they may contact the seller. The seller is required to pay back the difference as well as a bonus, which is 10 times the amount of the price difference, minus $1 and max $5. If the seller refuses to pay the customer may take them to court and recover damages or $250, whichever is greater, as well as a reasonable attorney fees of up to $300. Holy hell. The only thing I really see necessary here is that the price is clearly conveyed and the difference is refunded. That smeg is overkill. Also, I hate that gas stations don't clearly display their prices. Is this bag of candy $1? Is it $3.50? Who fracking knows? Wait a minute. I'm looking at the Michigan law here. It says 10 times the price difference. Maximum is $5. So she just made all this fuss over $5 when the difference was 10. I mean, she could have just pointed it out and just saved $10. And really, now she's out $5, don't you think? That's according to what I'm seeing here. What do you think? Do you think I'm right? Story 4. Grocery store had this sign up that said if an item rang up higher than an advertised price, it was free. It was the 80s and stores did stupid smeg like this, and I never see it in stores today. Mom was buying a box of Little Debbie cakes, and they rang up for $2.85 instead of the advertised $2.50. So now, Mom wants her free cakes. Cashier doesn't know what to do, summons a manager. Manager tells her to ring up the sale otherwise and he'll be right back. Comes back and hands my mother 35 cents cheerfully and says, "There you go." My mother points out the sign behind him and he says, "Oh, the last manager put that up. It doesn't make any sense. I'm the new manager and I just haven't had the sign removed yet." It was a printed plastic sign that was screwed into the wall. Mom insists they honor their sign. He says, "Nah." Now up to this point, I as an adult looking back am totally on board with Mom's actions. Mom gathers her things, decides against taking the little Debbies on principle, and we get in the car. Mom wordlessly drives downtown to the main store of this 3 to 5 store chain, knowing their office is next door. We walk into this perfectly 80s wood-paneled office where my mother asks the secretary to speak to the owner of the store and is permitted to do so since this is a family-owned business and their corporate office is smaller than the row of cubicles my staff occupy at work. Here, my mother unleashes a tirade about how she has lost faith in his brand and how his word is meaningless since they will not honor the sign, etc. This guy stands up, profusely apologizes, validates her anger, and then pulls out his wallet and hands her a $5 bill along with a promise that he will speak to the manager and the sign will be either honored or removed. We get home and find that the ice cream we bought melted in the trunk because summer ruined the cereal and the bread. Let's put this story in the dictionary next to the word Pyrrhic. For those of you who don't know, including me 10 seconds ago, Pyrrhic means of a victory won at too great a cost to have been worthwhile for the victor. Don't be a Karen. Story 1. Read your damn emails, Karen. I used to work in an office. What kind of work isn't particularly important to the story, so just picture a basic office job. Every January, HR would send an email to all employees with the employee handbook. This included job descriptions, office policies, etc. Every year since the PDF handbook had been established, it would be named with the year following it to establish it was different from the original and all other years. Any changes would be updated next to the section in the table of contents so you could see what had changed from the previous year and familiarize yourself with anything new. Now, with that background, we will introduce Karen. Karen had been with the company a pretty long time, about 10 years, I believe. She was fine at her job. Just fine. She would get things done, but not without making everyone else miserable in the process. She would ask questions that had already been answered and basically just waste everyone's time for fun. She was just plain nasty to people and tried as hard as she could to make everyone stay far away from her. The worst thing about her was she would always seem to be looking for a fight or looking for a reason to complain. She had threatened lawsuits a few times over any small thing, but would always just get over it and drop it because she knew no laws had been broken and it would never go anywhere. She'd comment on how she should sue basically every business she ever went to because she could live off the settlement and retire early, over the smallest issues you can imagine. She did her job and we never had a valid reason to fire her, especially knowing how lawsuit happy she was, so she stayed. Karen's job description, as per the handbook, called for a bachelor's degree. Karen did not have a bachelor's degree, but had been hired prior to that being a requirement, so she was grandfathered in. One day, a position above hers became open. A guy who we will call Terry had recently completed his master's degree after taking night classes for a few years, and since an internal promotion is typically better than an outside hire, he was chosen for the promotion. Terry had been at the company about 4.5 years and was well liked and great at his job. The new job required a master's degree in its job description, and him being a recent grad, it was a perfect fit, and everyone was happy for him. Everyone but Karen. Since she was constantly looking for something to sue about, she took it as a direct insult that she had not been considered for this promotion that she was not at all qualified for. She immediately cried discrimination and told our boss her lawyer would be in touch. We were all perplexed since it was very clear that this position required a master's degree. And given that she hadn't even had a bachelor's degree, there's no way she could have been hired for the role. What we soon realized was that Karen had saved the original company handbook, named Company Handbook, and had not bothered to open or save any new editions that were sent in the following 8 years. She just assumed no changes had been made and that it was just sent every year to ensure all employees had it. If she had bothered to open the file, she would have seen the sections that say updated in the table of contents. Since Karen cried a lot, No one expected much of this since it was a ridiculous claim. But sure enough, Karen gave her resignation letter via email, and it is scathing about how she can't bear to work in such a discriminatory environment that would only promote men. When any higher-ups try to speak to her about it and clear up the confusion, she basically tells them to take off and to read the damn email. I don't owe any more of an explanation. So she basically goes full Karen. Not long after, a letter comes in from her lawyer asking for a settlement to avoid a discrimination case. What Karen hadn't realized was that our boss's sister-in-law owned a law firm. She didn't really take on clients herself anymore and mostly just managed the other lawyers on her firm. She was basically semi-retired. What that meant was she had plenty of time to review any letters from Karen's lawyer and advise us. Since Karen didn't bother to read any of the updated handbooks, she was unaware that this position had required a master's degree for many years now, I believe about 6 years. She supplied her lawyer with the original company handbook from 9 years ago, and he used that as reference for his settlement demand. This was when we realized she hadn't read any new handbooks in years. Since Karen rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, boss's sister-in-law decided to personally take on the case. Every letter Karen's lawyer sent, she sent back one 3 times in length. Some of it wouldn't even really say anything, just wordiness. But it would certainly take Karen's lawyer a while to read it, and he did not come cheap. After several of these letters, they realized no settlement is going to happen. They want to take it to court. It's a pretty cut-and-dry case. Boss's sister-in-law shows evidence that Karen has received all updates via email. After the change was made and the handbook sent out, HR even sent an email to Karen specifically letting her know that she was grandfathered in and doesn't need to worry, to which Karen replied, "Okay, thank you," confirming receipt of it. The best part was when boss's sister-in-law said that they couldn't break company rules to give Karen a job she was totally unqualified for while neglecting another employee who went above and beyond to get his master's degree to advance, and that would be unfair to all other employees. Karen now had a huge, seriously huge bill from her lawyer for all of those letters and filing the case, etc. No job, no one she could list as positive recommendation, and no degree. In the time she had been at the company, it had become industry standard to require a bachelor's degree, so she was effectively shut out of her career. It would also be hard to explain how you work somewhere for a decade and don't have a letter of recommendation from anyone there. If she had only read her damn emails. I think the hardest part of this story to believe is that they actually require a degree and it actually applies to the job. But yeah, there's just really mounting evidence of just willful ignorance. This is not innocent ignorance, willful ignorance. She just really wanted to be treated right like that just because she'd worked there for so long, thinking that just being there gives her seniority. Read your damn emails. Story 2. Guy steals $400 of gas, but I get the last laugh. Backstory. I used to work at a marina when I was in high school that sold gas and allowed people to dock for free if they wanted to. Now one day a guy comes in on a pretty big boat and gets a lot of gas. Like $400 worth of gas. He comes to the counter to pay and gives me $400 in $100 bills, and I accept them and he goes on his merry way. Fast forward a week or so, and I am told by my boss that the bills he paid in were all counterfeit bills. Unfortunately, as he paid in cash, we have no way of tracking him down, so we think that he just got away with stealing $400 worth of gas. That is, until this idiot comes back after about a month and a half, thinking he got away with stealing the gas. When he comes back in, I recognize the guy and tell my coworker to call the police right away. However, I knew that this guy would leave if I let on that I had recognized him and we had discovered his plot to get free gas, so I decided to pretend I don't recognize him. Luckily for me, this guy asked to dock the boat for an hour or so on our dock, and I tell him it's not a problem. Now, it's policy to get the name and phone number of the customer using free dockage, as well as asking that they leave their keys in the boat so that we can move the boat to a different dock if needed. He complies to all of the rules and leaves his boat, and he leaves his keys with me. After probably about 15 minutes of waiting, the police show up on the dock and ask my boss where the guy is. My boss tells them he just left his boat, but we have his number and can get him to come back to the boat, and he then instructs me to do just that. At this point, I was ticked at this dude for making me look dumb and basically losing $400, so I called and told him, "Hey, this is me from Marina. It seems as though there's an issue with your engine, as it seems to be smoking." For those who don't know boats that well, engines are very expensive, and this one in particular was a 350 horsepower Yamaha engine, which is top of the line. So that man got back to that boat in record time. When he got back to the boat, the look on his face when he saw two cops waiting for him was priceless. He tried to play it off and act like he had done nothing wrong and he didn't know why the police were there, but that was short-lived as they arrested him and told him why he was being arrested. Turns out the guy had almost $2,000 in counterfeit $100 bills on him. Now this is just straight up ignorance. I don't know what kind of a fuss he made about it. I mean, did he act like a Karen and just start complaining and whining or anything? But the fact that not only did he come back to the people he ripped off, he had more money on him. Why? Why be that stupid? This is a situation where burning bridges is kind of essential, even if you're on water. What strange events have gotten swept under the rug like they didn't even happen? Story 1. The Las Vegas shooting. The worst mass shooting in America's history. Dozens unalive, hundreds injured. No one has any idea why this random dude stockpiled weapons and went on a mass unaliving spree, or why he ended when he did. We all just collectively went, "I guess we'll never know," and then forgot about it. The FBI concluded the same thing. They said he had gone to great effort to conceal his thoughts and motivations and never left behind any kind of journal, etc. Everyone wants answers, but sometimes it's no easy task to find. There's things, unfortunately, we'll never know. If he had documented head trauma, for example, that could be a reason why he did what he did. But a lot of people didn't like that answer. It's not satisfactory. That's why so many conspiracy theories are made. People don't get the answers they want, so they make it up. One man couldn't possibly be responsible. It was multiple shooters. It was a massive terrorist attack. That kind of stuff. I can't remember exactly what the narrative was people were making up, but I hate it when people think they know more than the actual investigators. Unfortunately, he shot himself, and we'll never know. Edit. Wow, thank you for the awards. In other comments, I got on the subject of mental health and making it acceptable, accessible, and affordable. Now, obviously, there's no way for us to say that if the Vegas shooter or any other mass shooter got help, that it could have prevented the shooting. It's complicated, and we don't know the answers for it. But it's a good start. Along with sensible gun control would be good as well. Fortunately, culture is beginning to shift, so it's a good start. Also, to the YouTube internet investigators down there chiming off, I will not acknowledge you further than this. Unless you physically investigated the shooter's room and home or homes, sat through the hours of hotel video footage, personally interviewed friends and family acquainted with the shooter, and combed through the mountain of background information that investigators did, or are an expert with a degree in physics and understand how sound travels, you have absolutely zero truth behind your claims. You are simply just rehearsing a script from a terrible writer, that's all. I remember how that shooting just kind of went away. I believe that might be just because there have been other shootings since then, and it's just becoming more of an occurrence. But I also agree that I think if one thing we could learn from this, even if we don't know the actual cause, that mental health should be more affordable and accessible, and that there should be sensible gun control after all of that. Story 2. Starting last summer, there have been unidentified snipers taking out random cars on different parts of I-10 in New Orleans, and nothing has come of it, and nobody's really talking about it. I mean, gang and illicit substance violence, neighborhood drive-bys, and the occasional bourbon shooting are one thing to ignore, but interstate snipers? Nobody finds that interesting? It's still happening. In 2020, New Orleans saw an average of 2 interstate shootings per month. And on January 12, a news release from the New Orleans Police Department detailed more than 30 interstate shootings in the Crescent City in 2021. 6 days later, they added 4 more victims to their list. Just before 3 p.m. on January 18, a Tuesday, a sniper unalived 34-year-old Whitney Watts as she traveled eastbound on Interstate 10. Police realized something was amiss when the victim's black car crashed into a guardrail at the Crowder Boulevard exit in New Orleans East. The coroner found Whitney's assailant shot her multiple times. Earlier that morning, another I-10 gunshot hit a man on Michaud Boulevard. And the Saturday morning before that, January 15, the interstate sniper unalived a 52-year-old man and wounded a 45-year-old woman on I-10 at Esplanade Avenue. Ironically, the United States' most infamous highway snipers unalived only 7 people, far less than the multitude of attacks recounted here. If NOPD can connect even half of these shootings, the wound count of this new I-10 sniper surpasses that of the D.C. Beltway snipers. What the hell? It's got to be the rate at which people are being unalived, because when the D.C. snipers went on their rampage, it was all the news would talk about. The D.C. snipers sent ransom demands to the press, demanding millions to stop. I assume these people or persons have not been communicating. I have not heard anything about this. I don't remember anything on the news about all of this. Anything of any kind of snipers. I remember the D.C. sniper news, but nothing about this. Anybody else heard anything about this? I don't know. Story 3. The floods on the east coast of Australia super recently. We experienced 1,000 milliliters of rain in less than a day. Whole towns have been wiped out. There are landslides, and people are still missing. There are no supplies, no food, no fuel, no electricity, and no water. They are still finding bodies, and there are still people stranded on cliff faces and mountains that could collapse any minute. If you drive through Lismore, NSW right now, everyone's belongings are all in piles larger than the houses on the street. There's sewage and toxic waste covering thousands of square meters. Civilians have had to rescue people from bridges, off roofs, and off mountains, risking their lives while suffering their losses to save others that are in a worse position. Thousands of civilians have been donating their own money, time, and resources to help those in need. Our government has done nothing and is shadow banning anyone speaking out on social media. The newspapers aren't covering it, even though this is the worst natural disaster Australia has experienced in decades. Unalivings are going unreported, and the media is not covering anything. People have been screaming for the Army and other qualified professionals to help. They've been begging to declare a state of emergency. It's taken 6 days for our Prime Minister to speak on this, and today he posted on Instagram some very staged images of the military helping. These photos show the Army in clean clothes, pretending to do tasks and pretending to help. The Army was literally instructed to go down there, get some pictures, and leave. People literally have been taking photos of them getting photos done with ring lights and other professional lighting equipment. When civilians asked for their help, they said that's not our duty and went back to scrolling on their phones. It's a disgusting response from our government and probably the most blatant sweep under the rug I've ever seen. I understand you have an election coming in May. I'm in Canada. Our leading national paper carried an article on it that suggests your PM is slowly acknowledging the frustration. It's amazing to me this could happen without broader awareness. What a news cycle. How could they get away with it? There were people photographing these people who were getting professional photos. They were getting the ring lights set up and doing everything like that. How are people buying this? I don't get it. Where are the photos of them being taken, of the Army taking photos with ring lights and professional equipment? That should just be enough to just show how insincere the government is responding to this. It's incredible. Story 4. In my hometown, there was some sort of audit, and it found that $8 million of taxpayer money was missing. It's a conspiracy now. All the online attention got me interested in this situation again. $7 million spent on life insurance policies for employees. Where I live, a very well-known green and gold tractor company stuck their multi-million-dollar expansion tax bill on the people of the small town, and they got away with it. My taxes went up $800 that year and only went down $300 the next. I hate that green and gold tractor company. If people only knew how scummy that company really is. Edit to add? Thank you for all the upvotes. I made this comment at 3 a.m., never thinking it would go anywhere. I did not name John Deere outright because they just annoy me for many reasons. This happened in Horicon, their founding town. This town is so deeply run by them it's gross. The taxes are outrageous for a town that has nothing. They block a lot of potential growth. Everyone thinks they're such a good company, but they're far from. They're only good if it's for their own gain. This reminds me of the time the U.S. government gave a few internet providers a butt-ton of taxpayer dollars to expand internet infrastructure and quality, and they just kind of kept it. It's almost like we need to hold our representatives and the thieves that steal from us accountable, isn't it?
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
What's something you thought only happened in movies until it happened to you? Story 1. My current situation. So after I left college, I found myself at my parents' place for, several months trying to get a jump start on my life, but only running into dead ends attempting to apply for jobs in my field. So I was stuck delivering pizza for Domino's for the time being. Around halfway through July, I recalled my dad saying something about the Washington Conservation Corps, an AmeriCorps program that would be the perfect place to start in order to get experience. So I look online, see all the open positions, and apply to each and every single one. I wanted to get on with it so badly I didn't care if I was out of the area. I got callbacks for interviews from 5 crews, most of which are in area, around Seattle, except one, a forest restoration crew out at Wenatchee. Due to the distance, that one had to be a phone interview, and I just assumed at the time, after it finished, that it would just kinda be so like the others. The Wenatchee guy is the first guy to call back and say yes. I'm excited, of course, but it also opens up a daunting challenge, finding a place to live in less than 2 months. I've never lived on my own before other than at college, so me and my family go and look up places. Most are out of my budget. The few that aren't are snatched up too quick. It has to be the middle of this month, September, and my final chance comes from a room to rent. I do everything to increase my chances. Not only answer the questions honestly and show I'm interested in the place, citing my job as the reason for looking, but also requesting to see it in person and even visiting with the main roomie for a couple hours. After that, I wait for the weekend, biting my nails, hoping I get it, since if I don't, I'll have to turn down the position and be back at square one. Tuesday morning, prior to work, person texts back, describing it as a tough decision, but I want out. So now I'm about to embark on my biggest life change so far, living with 2 roommates, both girls, and I'm a guy with a bunch of geek friends I would fit in perfectly with, and outdoor adventures on my job in a new area and a fresh start. We'll see where it goes from there. Obviously, your own sitcom. Part of it sounded like the typical thing of the person living in their parents' basement or working some sort of dead-end job. I thought that's where it was going. But now, yeah, I can see as I was reading along how it does seem to be a sitcom. I mean, the whole thing of both the girls and him being a guy, that's very 70s. I know that sitcom. I'm pretty sure you know it too. But there could be some pretty good ways to touch on that for writers in a modern sense. We'll see how it goes. Story 2. Destiny bringing 2 people together. I don't actually believe in that, but here's what happened to me. In the summer of 2015, I took my brother, who was on leave at that time, to a Fish concert. While my brother was getting beers for us, I saw a very attractive guy eating cotton candy. I approach a hot guy and strike up a convo. Long story short, we exchanged numbers and parted ways. Over the next month, he took me out on 3 amazing dates. We got to know each other, and I could tell we definitely had a connection. One night, he was taking me home. He told me he's got some stuff in his life he was working out and unfortunately couldn't pursue our relationship at that time. I was upset, but totally understanding and appreciative that he was man enough to let me know. Fast forward to a year later. Hot guy texts me out of the blue. We catch up a bit over text, and he eventually asks me if I'd like to go out and catch a drink with him. I said I'd love to, but it could only be platonic. I had a boyfriend at the time. We never ended up getting drinks to catch up. I wanted to, but I felt like it would be inappropriate to my current boyfriend. Okay, so fast forward another year. Hot guy texts me again. He says he's going to a couple of Fish shows coming up and has been thinking a lot about me. I got butterflies like a little schoolgirl. Truth is, I hadn't stopped thinking about him since I had first met him years ago. He asks if I'm still in a relationship, and I happily inform him that I'm single. We set up a time to meet up for dinner, and it went great. We still had the exact same feelings for one another than we had when we first met. That was over a year ago, and we've been together ever since. That's beautiful. It's also the nicest thing I've seen in a very long time. Wow, that was really great. Everyone was really respectful of the people they were seeing at the time. And yeah, it does sound like it was too good to be true, like it was in a movie. If you would have heard that, you thought it was just some writer's concoction. Very cool. Story 3. Really awkward. My grandpa heard me having physical intimacy loudly for a very long time when my boyfriend and I hooked up for the first time. I brought him back to my place, which was a guest house behind my grandparents' house. It was quite a night. The next morning, I checked my voicemail. There were several messages from him, and they are, "Hey, you okay? Thought I heard something. Love ya. Are you all right? Do I need to call the cops? Just call. I'm coming back to check on you. Answer the door." And that was the last message. There was no knock. He didn't even get on my porch before he knew that I was praying to God. The next morning, my boyfriend and I listened to the message in horror. We both were a little drunk, and it got amazingly out of hand. We never heard the phone. We never heard anything. Boyfriend and I left to go back to where we'd left his car the night before because safety, as my guy introduced himself to Grandpa, not blinking. I think he was a little proud of himself, and I think Grandpa respected that we never talked about it. Yeah, awkward, spicy moments with your parents. Pocket dialed my dad during a quickie with my boyfriend in high school. I hung up and cried. Then called him back trying to tell him we were watching a movie. We never spoke of it again. I think about it now and wish I was dead. Yeah, those are the kind of memories I think we all just tend to block out of our minds on a regular basis just to make sure we can function during the day. I think if those things come back in our mind, anybody would just freeze up and just have to do a little mental cleanup in our minds just to shove it back into that door we don't open to the thoughts we don't think about. Story 4. Talked to this gorgeous girl at a party for hours. We had a great time. Played drinking games, told jokes. Both of us were laughing. We had the same interests. It was great. No hogwash either. We seemed like peas and carrots. Eventually, she said she had to go leave with her friends, and I was too nervous at the time to ask for her number. She said goodbye and walked to her waiting friends in the car across the street from the party. I moaned to my friends about letting her get away, and they said, "Come on, dude, go after her." So I said, "You know what? Frack it." Downed my beer and ran to the fence in the backyard we were in, jumped it, and sprinted to her car that was still parked at the corner at the end of the street. I could literally hear the corny rom-com music playing in my head as I ran to her. Slid smooth AF right up to the car, knocked on the door, and her friend opened it. Out of breath, panting, I poked my head in the back seat and said, "Hey, I gotta ask, what's your number?" The music in my head was at a crescendo at this point, and then she responds, "I have a boyfriend." Every note in my head immediately shut off. I stared at her, she stared at me, her 3 friends in the car stared at both of us. I just silently did an about face and walked away. I swore I was in a comedy film at that moment. Oof. Story 5. I knew this guy that was down on his luck in high school and had lost faith in hard work ever paying off. I told him I was determined to find him a 4-leaf clover. Searched every day in this big field of clovers by my house. Did this for weeks and then off and on for months. A year went by, but I never truly gave up and would occasionally go out looking. I even prayed to God I'd find one because the guy really seemed to have faith in me, proving to him that working for something and believing in yourself pays off. Near the end of senior year, I had pretty much given up, but would still kneel down to look at clover patches on occasion. Then one day, my sister comes in and asks if I saw our pond. We have a huge pond. It's more like a small lake. I said, no, and she said, there are tons of 4-leaf clovers. So I go running out, and there are thousands of them everywhere. Nothing but 4-leaf clovers. I gave one to the guy, and he was seriously moved. He got into the military, and every now and then he sends me a pic of the clover. He always keeps it with him. Friendship goals. That's unbelievably kind. Sometimes little things make an enormous impact. Health inspectors. What's the worst thing you've ever found when inspecting a restaurant/shop? Story 1. A restaurateur was trying to reopen a failed one into a new one. It had been a Mexican joint and was going to be a deli. I was working for a pest control company, and they called us to take care of a few bugs. No big deal. They're just proactive. I get there. It's clean, smells okay, but I'm about 1 month into this new job and experience. I'm going to get started, and I'm mixing up the smeg we have to use in restaurants, and I'm using the water from one of their triple sinks. The water is coming out hot. It's a Vegas summer, so I'm letting it run until it cools down some. I look over at the floor sink the triple sink drains into, and there's a lot of German cockroaches coming out of it. Frack it. This water will do. I fill up the 2 gallons, put the pump and handle back in and shake it to mix it up, pump it to pressurize it, and get to work. When you start with a full canister, there's less air, so you have to stop and pause to repump it to keep the pressure up. As I'm hitting all the cracks and crevices behind the sinks, the equipment, under everything, the seam in the wiped-down plastic walls, etc., roaches are just pouring out into the open. It's in the thousands stage, where now, when I stand still, they're trying to hide under my boots. The last time I have to stop to pump up the canister, I'm standing on its stainless steel with the brass handle between my feet. Frack this. I call on the radio for a coworker who I know is nearby because he has a fog unit, and I don't at this point. newly hired, wasn't 100% kitted out. Tony swings by. I'm waiting outside, and we renegotiate the service. The new owner had been a little on the light side with the depth of his problem. He agrees. We get to fogging. Tony's showing me how to do it, so I'm just walking behind him. At this point, there's tens of thousands of roaches everywhere. Floor, walls, ceiling. We get to the walking, and above it, where I think the compressor was a 4-foot by 8-foot by 10-foot space. Tony directs the fog stream up in there, and the roaches start pouring out in such numbers that briefly you can barely see the stainless steel of the walk-in door. The entire rest of the day, any little itch on my skin, you're leaping to slap it and check it's not a roach stuck on you. That sounds like a living nightmare. If I hadn't seen it for myself, and if it was on film, I would have probably thought it was some sort of CGI kind of thing. But yeah, this is also one of those lists that's probably going to make me happy that I've been preparing food at home for the last week or so. I still want to go for a pizza. Let's see if that still happens by the end of this video. Story 2. High-end Thai place in a popular tourist area. Go downstairs to the kitchen and open up the freezer. On the top shelf of the freezer, they're storing loose beef, pork, and chicken in 3 separate piles. The meats are not in any containers. They're all sitting on a large piece of cardboard the restaurant had placed on the bottom of the shelf. We poke the cardboard, and our finger goes right through it. The juices from the 3 meats had turned the cardboard into pulp. We then notice it dripping from the combined sludge of chicken, pork, and beef blood. From the looks of the cardboard, it had been dripping for a while. We looked to the shelf below to see the results of the drip. Underneath the meats, in the shelf second from the top, the restaurant was storing 3 buckets of ice cream without lids, directly under the meat drip. We look inside the ice cream containers and see congealed, partially frozen, cardboard-laced raw meat drippings pooled in the center of each tub of ice cream. None of the ice creams were more than halfway full. We asked the kitchen manager how long they've been storing their items like this. He doesn't remember. At least a few months. My theory is because the place was A, nice restaurant, and B, an ethnic restaurant, patrons were less likely to complain about odd flavors. For example, instead of complaining about blood in the ice cream, wondering out loud if that taste is star. That's one of the few inspections that made me feel physically sick. Place still gets an A because the restaurant grade system in my city is about as effective as the TSA. Ugh. Now see, I've been to Thailand before, and this kind of storage system wouldn't fly at a lot of restaurants over there. They're very particular, and over there, I've eaten spicy food, but I've never gotten sick from eating any of the food over there. So I think this is just they're trying to get away with what they said, being ethnic, and no one's complaining about weird flavors. Story 3. Health inspector here. Here are my top 3. 1. An old liquor store, which had once been the front unit of a housing duplex, had now been converted into a full-service deli. Sandwiches, fried chicken, etc., without plan review, so they were severely lacking in all the proper space and equipment. Observed were rat infestation, droppings everywhere in the place, mountains of old cast-off equipment in the back giving the rats a home, meat defrosting on the hood of an inoperable car on the side alley, back unit of duplex, now converted to food storage, had unfinished wooden boards on the floor which were now soft and rotting from soaking up years of meat juice and everything else. 2. While inspecting a Chinese buffet, I noted to the employees that there were tubs of frozen fried shrimp stacked on top of one another without covers, so they needed to discard the top layers of the food and put on the tub lids. As they scrambled to do so, they knocked over the tower of shrimp, spilling it everywhere. As I was standing there, they hurriedly started scooping the shrimp off the floor and back into the tubs. I'm standing right here, you guys. A guy ordered commercial sausage-making equipment delivered to his private home. Manufacturer got suspicious and tipped off the health department. Turns out, the guy would go hunting all sorts of exotic game meat without permits, process them into sausage in his rat-infested garage, droppings the size of jelly beans, and was selling them to the public. Don't buy food from home cooks, folks. Yeah, that's the kind of sausage that sounds like it would go really well with pink sauce. What do you think? Also, that must have been the very third story. It wasn't marked. Story 4. Hello. Walked into a restaurant in the morning before lunch rush and saw the cooks actively preparing raw chicken in the dirty mop sink. The cook said that the cooking process would make it safe to eat. Walked into a taco shop and found a reach-down cooler infested with German cockroaches. When I brought it to the owner's attention, he was in denial and said that the health department is constantly trying to pick on the little guys. As he was talking, a full adult cockroach appeared on the counter, and without hesitation, he took the knife used to cut burritos, stabbed it, then began to place the knife back to its original location. Received a complaint of a heavy grease smell coming from a restaurant. Showed up and saw that the owner had been dumping grease outside because his drains were clogged and backing up. Saw that every floor drain he had was actively overflowing and there was sewage all over the floor. Since his drain lines were installed incorrectly, all the sewage water back-siphoned into the ice machine and food prep sink. While this was all happening, they were still serving food and taking orders as if it wasn't a big deal. The cook would cut chicken, then switch to using a plunger on the drains, then back to cutting chicken without ever washing his hands. Walked into a market with an owner who was visibly nervous. As we were talking, I noticed a large amount of blood in the drains. There were also a lot of black bags containing meat products with no labels or proof of where they purchased it. As I lifted the drain cover, there was blood and bones inside. Later found out that the staff were bringing live goats into the kitchen and unaliving them on site. Story 5. I worked in the deli of a convenience store for nearly 15 years. It was a constant struggle to explain to my boss how I couldn't save the leftover chicken and veggies and sell them the next morning. My customers were happy to pay more knowing the food was always fresh. 6 months ago, my boss decided to lease out the kitchen and move me to the main store. Ex-customers keep coming to me to complain about the food tasting bad and making them sick, so I went back to check and counted about 6 violations that would get them shut down or fined. Clorox bleach stored on the floor next to chicken breading, defrosting meat stored above the vegetables, it drips down onto the veggies, and at the end of the day, the cook takes all the food trays and puts them uncovered into the fridge to sell the next day without letting them at least cool down. It smells like rotting food back there since they never clean out the drains. I've also seen her cutting uncooked meat with a machete on the bare floor as she never ices down the raw chicken at the end of the day, so it starts to stink by midweek. Boss has lost half his regular customer base.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.